Well, welcome to the Leadership Lounge. It's great to have you join us today. I'm delighted again to have Anna Hennell-James back with us again, a retired Academy Trust CEO and good friend of mine.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah,
Been a long time.
Lovely to have you back, Anna. So today we're going to be looking at mastering the minimum. And as a leader, we're encouraged, in the words of Seth Godin, to paint the picture of the future, go there and people will follow. Now, Seth Godin has that beautifully put, but we know in reality, often that can be a challenge. We're the artists of the culture that we want to create, but often we know painting that picture that we want to establish is not always followed. People have their own ideas and standards that are perhaps different to ours. And therefore, as a leader, establishing the parameters, ensuring the minimum standards are met, are key to us maintaining that culture. So I'm going to explore that with you today, Anna. The minimum we accept sets the standards.
Yes, it does.
How true is that? You're saying yes, it does.
It does.
Yeah,
it absolutely does. It's really true. And as soon as you accept something lower on some things or from some people, you start a downward trend that's then quite hard to turn around. So it's I think it's really key that.
So how does it set that downward trend then? What do you think happens when we do that?
It's just that little bit of creeping, really. So if you give on one thing, if somebody, to put it basically, gets away with something, then next time it will be a little bit more and a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then if people see other people not conforming, not doing things that are expected, well, if they're not doing it, for some people, it would be, why should I?
Yeah.
So then it can spread. And for people who do conform, the people that always do what's expected, when it's expected, do everything right, it's highly frustrating to see colleagues not doing that and fundamentally being seen to get away with it.
Yeah.
So it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, and I guess what happens is as you say, that initially you get some who go, well, if Bertha's doing it, then I can do it.
Yeah.
So you have some of those who will quickly follow where they see where you can get away with things. I guess it's a natural human instinct to make things as easy for yourself as possible. You'll have those stalwarts who will stick to it, but it's almost like they'll hold out, and it's almost like the sea on the sandshore. Eventually, the whole thing then breaks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you don't manage that minimum, you'll get the initial transfer as, will come across. But even your stalwarts
will eventually, people will either join in and start going down the slippery slope, or they'll go, do you know what, I'm not going to stay here because this is not, it's often about fairness. This is not fair, or this is not right that it's being done like this, and then they leave and you lose good people.
And then, of course, ultimately what happens is you're watering down the impact of either whatever initiative you're trying to do or the culture you're trying to set in order for that to be the seedbed for the growth of your organisation. So where have you seen kind of issues either maintained well and then you've seen the impact of that, or issues where perhaps those standards have not been maintained and the minimum that it needs to be expected has not been maintained, and then you've seen the impact of that? So where have you seen examples?
So I've seen, in one place I worked, I have seen the very negative impact of standards being allowed to slip and there being no challenge, and on really simple things like, playtime is 15 minutes. So a couple of minutes before playtime is up, you need to get yourself up and out of the staff room or whatever you've been doing to be ready, to greet your class back in. So you're there and ready and prepped. And sitting watching people, sitting in the staff room still, and the clock's ticked past and it's still ticking past, and they are always slow to leave. Gradually what happens is everybody then stays and sits, and suddenly playtime isn't 15 minutes, it's 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then by the time people have moved and gone and children are back in class, that's 25 minutes. And if it's never challenged, then it just slips and slips and gets longer.
So we're talking about an erosion here, isn't
Yeah,
it? It's not
yeah.
even that you've then moved 1 minute or 1 point below the minimum.
Yeah, just all
It then becomes very quickly 5, 10.
10 stretches out.
Yeah.
Oh, and if it's, if it's a nice day and the children are playing out on the field, then maybe it'll be half an hour before we
Yeah.
get off our backsides and go out to bring them in, sort of thing.
And for those listening outside of education might think, oh, what's the matter with 5 minutes play for kids?
Yeah.
Of course, that then is going to impact the time you're spending
That's
on
taking away
learning,
from
and
learning
that's the
time.
core purpose
Yeah.
of what a
And
school's about.
also, there will be somebody outside, at least supervising those children, who's not sat in the staff room having a nice chat and a cup of tea or whatever. They're out there with the children but can't come in until everybody else has come out to collect them. So it's a knock-on effect. But I've also seen that it work really, really well in a visit I did a few years ago to a specialist residential setting for young people, boys, with social and emotional challenges, where dysregulated behaviour would often result in damage being done to property. So windows broken, doors kicked in, displays and things ripped off the walls. And the culture and approach at that school was very much that these young people deserve a really high quality environment. So even though it's them who are causing the damage, it will be repaired, replaced, fixed as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Same day if possible, within a day or two.
Yeah.
So that it goes back to looking lovely, and it might get trashed again. But the head was absolutely adamant, you keep doing that, because eventually they come to understand we care about the environment, we are going to keep it to this standard, and they come to care about it too, and the incidences lessen, and then there will always be something in that kind of setting kicking off.
Yeah.
But then you get also that peer influence of don't rip that display down, we don't do that here because somebody's taken time to put it up. So it's that influencing of behaviour. It would be really easy to go, do you know what, you've kicked the door in, you can live with
Choices
the door,
and
consequences and all of that. But they didn't do that. And when I went to visit, the place was immaculate and looked beautiful. And there was not even that general kind of wear and tear damage that you might expect. And it was just giving those young people an environment to be proud of and to start to, address some of their challenges and rebuild their confidence in themselves that they were valued because the environment was nice and somebody took the time and trouble to fix it and make it right for them.
What I love about your 2 examples then, particularly that second one, is the importance of the purpose driving what you're doing.
Yeah.
So when you're really clear on the purpose, so that second example was all around value. We value our place in order to value the children, and this drives everything we do. So clear on that means you can't stop yourself maintaining the minimum because this is absolutely crucial to your purpose. In that first example, where there's a deterioration on timekeeping, again, because there perhaps isn't the focus on what's the school all about. That it's interesting, that importance of purpose drives whether you set those standards. And what we're seeing from your 2 examples there, both the good and the bad, that when we don't maintain the minimum is a dropping of standards. And when you drop the standards, then actually in one sense you lose part of your purpose, your vision, your mission for actually what you're trying to do. So what are the areas of leadership, do you think, that we need to know what our minimum standards are? Is it everything, or are there some really key important ones?
I think key things are behaviour and attitudes. So how you expect people to behave in the workplace, how you expect people to behave with clients, how you expect people to behave with colleagues, attitudes that are not acceptable are clear. And also policy and procedures, because that you have your vision, your mission, what is driving you, but that is all supported and runs because of your policies and procedures which reflect that. So as soon as somebody starts going, well, the policy might say we do that, but I'm just going to tweak it a bit or do it a bit differently, it has the danger of undermining everything else, because that's one of your sort of, foundation building blocks.
And so let's pull out each of these in terms of the impact of those. So when we maintain a minimum around policy, everyone knows what's happening. There's a sense of routine, consistency, and an element, therefore, of safety in that. Even if you don't fully agree with it, you
Yeah,
at least
and
know this is
and
what
if
we do
everybody
here.
else is following policy, then the bit you're doing
Yes.
is going to connect into the bit they're doing, because
Yeah.
the policy's obviously been designed to make sure everything works
Yeah.
together. So as soon as one person starts not doing it, it's not necessarily just their bit they're responsible for that's affected.
Yeah.
It's other people's.
Yeah.
Because if their bit isn't followed and done how it's supposed to be, the next person
Yeah.
potentially can't do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. And if we think around the other one, around behaviour and attitudes in the workplace, again, absolutely key, because if we start to lower some of those standards, there's that consistency again, that people don't know what is expected or what should happen. And then I think particularly around that sense of lack of safety there as well, isn't it? That if some people are behaving in a way that's below that minimum,
Yeah.
it can make others feel unsafe.
Unsafe, uncomfortable. And also, if you're talking about the way people behave with customers, clients, whatever, reputationally, that can be
Yeah.
very damaging as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as you were just talking about that one, this is the one often I think people almost very easily let pull down, oh, but that's just Belinda, or
Just how they are.
just how
That's their
they are, or did they really
personality.
mean that, or was that
Yeah.
person just a little bit oversensitive?
Yeah.
And then what you're starting to do in those kind of comments and questions is lower the minimum.
Because you're accepting it, you're excusing
Yeah.
their behaviour, and you are excusing them not following what they are supposed to.
Yeah, yeah, and there's also it's like, oh, they're having a tough time, or we need to be a bit sympathetic towards how they're feeling. But again, lowering those standards impacts on
Slippery
others.
slope.
Slippery slope then becomes that erosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it's okay for Belinda to do that, then it's okay for us to do that.
Yeah, right, yeah, absolutely.
So, what is the impact then when we don't accept our minimum but start to accept, well, their minimum or their maximum? Who knows? But in one sense, their standards. We start to accept their minimum rather than our minimum.
I think fundamentally you end up drifting or even sinking down to the lowest common denominator, and it just pulls everybody and everything down.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, the culture of your organisation has shifted. Your outputs have probably been impacted.
Yeah.
Your drivers are no longer driving you where you want to go, so your purpose is now being undermined.
Yeah.
So
it's massive.
fairly catastrophic.
Yeah, we think it as just one little thing, isn't it? But actually, if we
yeah.
think quite often just in life generally, how do we end up with something going wrong? It's often something small. So even if you think in mechanics that, why did this engine break? Actually, it didn't start with that, valve going. Actually, it started with a tiny little screw here or a bit of oil that isn't quite right.
And then
The impact is bigger. So it's the same in terms of for our organisations. We might just see this as a moment with Belinda when she's been a bit snappy, but actually, it's that erosion, that drip, that then gradually, as either others join in or Belinda feels, okay, so this is now acceptable. And then she goes to the next level. And of course, the more you let her get away with things, she'll continue to drop the standards of what you're expecting.
Yeah, and it's just like that, keep almost pushing the boundaries to see what I can get away with.
Yeah.
And if there's never a check or a challenge, then you just keep going.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a phrase I often used to use in working with, when working with teachers talking about children, I talked about they need firm boundaries but soft edges. So almost this sense of the padded wall.
Yeah.
No, this is the padded bit, but there'll be a softness, but you won't be able to cross it.
You're not going beyond it.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same with adults that we're working with in our organisation. The boundaries need to be clear. If someone is struggling with stuff, there should be a sense where they're not hurting themselves as they hit that boundary, or we're not hurting them, but we are saying, no, this is the boundary.
This is it,
Yeah, but we act with firmness, but also with that sense of compassion if somebody has an issue. So it's quite interesting to really explore then what almost the human dynamics, the psychology of what causes us to not hold on to our minimum. Because if we had decided at the beginning, right, this is the culture I want to set, this is the culture and the standard I want to accept, for example, on behaviour, let's pull that one, it's probably the one that most people come across, isn't it? This is the way we should speak to people, shouldn't interrupt people, shouldn't talk over people, shouldn't be rude to people. And then Belinda does something like that. So, what causes us then? If we were really clear at the beginning, what sort of things do you think come into...
I think particularly with behaviour, it's worrying about the impact if you challenge people. So, if we speak to Belinda about the way she's speaking to colleagues, is she going to, blow up and go off on one? And are we going to get a load of, an angry response? Are we going to get a very tearful, emotional response? Is she going to go off in a huff? Is she going to go off and tell everybody, how dare they speak to me about that? I'm just saying what I think, and if more people,
it's my truth.
It's my truth, and that very critical thing. And that's quite hard to deal with and to manage. And again, there are potential ripples of that can go out. So it's not, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do, but the risk is if you don't, everything we've already, talked about and said. And I went to a conference once where a very experienced CEO and former school leader was talking about managing people, and she used a phrase that really sort of stuck with me and I was able to refer back to, and she said, in this organisation we talk to people, not about them. And I think that really helps you get hold of the fact that you need to address it with the person. There's no point going and sitting and talking to your deputy or the next person down and going, oh, Belinda's at it again. So they know Belinda's at it. Belinda might not be self-aware enough to recognise what she's doing
and the impact of what
she's doing. So you need to talk to people. But like you say, it's around how you do that. You don't need to go in being aggressive or hostile in your challenge. You need to raise it with Belinda in terms of that holding up a mirror and having those firm boundaries with soft edges.
And just explain to her the impact in those critical conversations. So as I'm hearing you there, I'm just reminded of stuff I talk around training when we're looking at those critical conversations. Reason 4 needs to be greater than your reason not to. So when you're going into, if Belinda is misbehaving, what's my reason for this conversation? It's also looking at what's my reason for holding back. Just as you said, it might be because I'm worried how she'll kick off. It's then asking the impact. If I do have this conversation, yes, the impact could be she'll kick off a bit. The impact if I don't is actually there continues to be some really unhappy people. It's impacting the culture. And then you begin to realise, actually, I have to have this conversation. And then I wonder whether some of the bit that sits underneath that is also then the story you're telling yourself, about why you can't have that conversation with Belinda, because maybe you don't feel particularly secure. Either secure on how to hold that conversation, but also maybe not even completely secure around your reasons, your explanations, or maybe how to help her to behave differently. So that, but it's beginning to identify that in yourself and understand
and
it.
I think if you are not confident about going in with that challenge, holding up the mirror over a behaviour or a not following policy, you're potentially doubting the validity of that policy or your expectation anyway, in which case you probably need to review it. If I'm not prepared to challenge her on this, how important is it? Or, she's not doing this and I'm not prepared to challenge her. Is my expectation that she does that therefore reasonable or unreasonable? So there's a bit of self-reflection in that as well.
And I think then going back that step even deeper about saying how clear am I actually on my purpose here and my vision for this organisation. Because if I'm not prepared to take this conversation I'm going to have with Belinda seriously, and just saying to anyone listening, apologies if your name is Belinda and you're listening to it, it's just a random name we've come up with. Not all Belindas are bad, lots of them are good. but yeah, it's just getting really clear on, yeah, why, what is my why behind all of this? And if it is about, yeah, I want this environment to be a safe, happy environment, then I have to have this conversation. But it's then being driven, it's getting that clarity for yourself that the reason I'm having this conversation is about safety and happiness. And the way I will hold this conversation is about safety and happiness. And if part of your culture was we need to be collaborative, then the way you'll hold that conversation with Belinda will be collaborative. So yeah, I think we're right in that some of this is around a lack of clarity on that purpose, maybe a lack of
And also, can you hand on heart say that it has been made clear to Belinda from the moment she joined the organisation or the moment a change was made,
Yeah.
what the expectation is? Because if that hasn't been clear to Belinda, then actually to challenge Belinda on not doing something or acting in a certain way is not really fair. She's going, well, you never said I couldn't do that. It's that
yeah, my understanding of collaborative is that we hold really confrontational conversations. Yeah,
So
confrontation is good as part of collaboration,
but
it's bringing that clarity on how we do that.
Around all of that purpose, has that been made really explicit to everybody? Do they understand it? And have you done the work for them to buy into that?
Yeah. So what we're unpicking even in this question is it is about perhaps a series of things that might cause us to not hold on to our minimum. Sometimes it's about what we're telling ourselves about our confidence and our behaviour. Sometimes it's what we're telling ourselves about how the relationship with this person might then go wrong. Sometimes it's reflecting about have I actually really got my purpose or my policy clear and right? And in some ways, of course, it seems a bit odd what we've just talked about, that, well, surely if Belinda is shouting at somebody, everybody knows we shouldn't shout. But Belinda clearly doesn't because she's behaving in that way. So we've got to bring that clarity. But what we're talking about here is that when we see the minimum is being pushed against, it is about this self-reflection, but also reflection on the policy and the process and the purpose of what we're trying to bring in. And almost as part of that reminds you what is important, but also what can then drive the conversation. Yeah. So we talked several times about this erosion where, it starts with the 1 minute and becomes a 5 minute. It starts with the, level one bit of annoyance and frustration. And then before you know it, someone's shouting in somebody's face. So what do we think are some of the causes towards erosion that, surely if someone's, oh, well, I don't want the boundary there of minimum, I just want it here. Why does it erode? And at some point it just implodes if it's not been dealt with.
I think it's partly human nature. And I think it's just that in the same way that when we talk about improving organisations and the work that's been done about marginal gains and how all those teeny tiny things add up
to improve things,
then I think the reverse is true. All those teeny tiny slippages add up to a lot of erosion and shifting until you are miles away from where you wanted to be.
Yeah. So I wanted to link to that where there's almost that human nature thing that in order for us to be within, it's natural to be part of a pack. This is where we belong. And to be part of this pack, what does that mean and look like? So we scan, don't we, to say what are the parameters, what are the rules of the pack? And if we're seeing some members of the pack setting it there. And others then set it, and so if someone goes, well, actually, I want to get away with here, and so as soon as then a few others start to, this is why you get that erosion, because we're generally pack animals, and we'll go towards where perhaps the bulk of the pack seem to be going, and if 2 or 3 are starting it, then it's almost that snowball effect that then comes from it. So it's just being aware that it's about creating that sense then of we're setting that minimum. And this could be something quite important for us to learn as leaders. We might know what our minimum is, but it's crucial that it isn't just us that's
other people
maintaining that.
Other people need to know and maintain it. And I think if things start slipping and more people join in, because like Belinda's got away with it, so I'm going to do it. In many organisations, you will have people who will go, well, no, actually, I know that's not acceptable, and I will keep my standard up here. But it's quite hard work to keep going at that expected level when all around you other people aren't. And I think eventually some people do get, it's the frustration or resentment, or actually if too few people are driving that expected standard, it can become exhausting. They go, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And they either drop down, which is really hard for somebody who would naturally try and, be the very best version of themselves all the time. So the other option they have is to leave.
Yeah. And then you're losing
And
some
then
of those
you're
people that
losing,
maintain
and
it.
then you're left with the people
Yeah.
who are more comfortable going, well, we'll just
Stick down here.
stick down here and slide it a little bit more that way.
So what are the areas of erosion? Are they the same as the areas of minimum, e.g. the behaviour and policy, or are there other areas where we can perhaps see it's really more natural where things start to erode if we don't step on them quickly?
I think sometimes it is those day-to-day basics. It's the timekeeping, the meeting deadlines,
Yes.
the remembering how we answer the telephone to clients or customers. Those things that should be routine and embedded are things where if somebody's having a bad day or something unexpected has cropped up, it might be, I know I'm supposed to be in that meeting at 10 o'clock, but do you know what, I just need to finish these emails. I'll be there by 5:05.
Yeah.
So it's those regular routine things that can then start to slip.
Yeah.
And then when they start to slip, if there's no check and challenge, then something bigger might start to slip. So I think sometimes it is those, keep a tightness on what seems mundane.
Yeah.
Because if you're keeping even the most dull, mundane, boring thing absolutely where you want it, then the message is, I'm going to challenge you on, being a minute late to a meeting and ask why. Then if I decide to completely not do my job as I'm supposed to do it, then I know there's going to be some challenge coming because I got picked up on being just a tiny bit late to a meeting.
Yeah. So it's interesting, that's moving us on to our next stage around how we maintain standards. So one of the things you're saying is worry about the little things.
Yeah.
And that perfect
Sweat the
example
small
there,
stuff.
1 minute is what you pick up on, because then everybody realised, well, actually, if that's the standard, then certainly 5-10 minutes not turning up at all would certainly get me in a sense of trouble. So did you say the phrase was sweat the standards?
Sweat the small stuff.
Sweat the small stuff. Yeah. So that's one thing that helps you maintain standards. Is that the only thing?
No, I think as the leader, you need to walk the talk. It's no point. You can't say to everybody else, we all need to be in meetings on time, and then you waltz in 5 minutes late going, sorry, I was on a really important call because I'm the boss. That's okay. No, that is not acceptable. Or if it does, there will be times maybe when it is absolutely unavoidable, but then you publicly apologise. You don't expect people to just take it from you because you're the leader. You make it clear that the expectations you have apply from the top down. So it's walking the talk and being seen to do that, and publicly embodying the expectations and modelling them, and building a team around you that are going to do the same.
Yeah.
So having those conversations with people, if you're going to tackle something across the organisation, for example, people being on time to meetings, I'd have all the senior leaders in beforehand and go, right, we're going to have a push on this. So every single one of us needs to be bang on time, if not a few minutes early, for every single meeting, whether it's a whole staff team meeting, whether it's a one-to-one with somebody, whether it's a departmental meeting. We need to be on time every time if that's what we're telling other people they've got to do.
I love that last one. I think that's really important for several factors. Working with a team rather than just yourself. So obviously, depending on the size of your organisation, we are but one person, aren't we? So we are not omnipresent. We don't have the divine nature of doing that, do we? So actually creating a number of people who know those minimum standards and stick to them is crucial. and having a number of you doing that, so you're not alone, because already you're creating a sense of this is what the tribe, this is what the pack
this
do.
is what we
as
do
part of
here.
that process
This is
key.
how it's done here.
And what you're tapping on there is, I talk to people about the 4 M's if you're going to try and grow and develop a culture. So this modelling, so you as the leader modelling it, you've picked up on that one, and then mentoring others. So you've talked
So,
about your
yeah,
SLT, saying actually this is what we want to be doing, and you're chatting that through. The 2 others that I've got are the Miranda moments, which is part of mentoring, when you're turning, like Miranda on the
Yeah.
TV program, turning and explaining what your thinking is and why you did what you did, how that helps, how
Yeah.
that maintains. And then the meerkat one is praising what you want to see. So when you're seeing it,
Yeah.
so that people realise that's the expectation, or when I do that, I get the well dones. So I think those 4 M's, you picked out a couple,
Yeah.
particularly the examples you've given. Have you used any of those in the way you've helped to maintain minimums? Have you seen good examples of those?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things is that praise and positive response when people are getting it right.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, I expect you to do it because I told you.
Yeah.
People need positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
So it is around that. When you see the desired behaviour, make a point of saying so and
Yeah.
celebrating it.
Yeah.
And find some positive feedback. It has to be genuine.
Yeah, and specific, isn't it?
And
We don't need to
specific.
be, as I call it, a Mr. Grace. If you remember back to the
Yeah.
old days of Are You Being
Yeah,
Served?
so,
Well
yeah.
done, everybody. It needs
Yeah.
to be when
Needs
you did
to
X.
be when you did it.
Yeah,
This was the impact. This what we saw.
Yeah, and then you get like the meerkats. People will
people
turn
go,
to that.
oh, they got
Yeah.
and people want some of that. Human nature is to want that positive reinforcement, isn't it? So it's that is really important, and it's having those other people around you doing it as well, so that your senior leaders spread it a bit wider, and then if somebody has been praised in that way, they might, they see a colleague do something, or they then
do
give that. But so again, it's those ripples going out.
Yeah.
So then everybody is giving positive reinforcement when it's the desired behaviour, approach, attitude, whatever, and that just is a further reinforcement for everybody. This is how we do it here.
Yeah. And what you're talking about there is that ripple effect, the pervasive of the minimum, and the focusing on it, the celebrating of it. And how we spread that culture is key. So I do some work with people around looking at this whole thing around mentoring, and actually how quickly you can establish a culture by doing that. So it's about taking somebody you think is pretty well nearly there. So for example, if I was to take you and I just do that last little bit of topping up and mentoring, I do some Miranda momenting, I explain what my thinking was, I explain the impact of that, so they really get it. And so now you're ready. So now I go off and mentor the next person, and you now can mentor the next person. And you're quite purposeful about it. You talk about it, right? Who now can we get on board with this culture of the minimum we're going to be expect, which is a high minimum. You now mentor the next one, I'm mentoring the next one. By the time we finish that round, there's now four of us really holding that minimum standard.
Yeah.
And then, of course, those 4 go and mentor someone. So now you're up to 8 people. And then those 8 people now go and mentor someone, you're up to 16.
Yeah.
So actually within the space of 4 mentoring steps, 16 people are now maintaining that minimum. So pretty quickly you can ensure that throughout your organisation you've got almost your guardians, your custodians of the minimum.
And it's having that, that big enough group to bring about change and shift it. And they've all become your cheerleaders, and set that standard and spread it further. That then also makes it more difficult for those around the periphery to continue not at that minimum standard, to fall below it.
Yeah. It's interesting, this links a little, Patrick Lencioni's work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. One of the pieces that he talks about there is this accountability, absence of accountability you have in dysfunctional teams. And he's not talking about that the main leader isn't holding everyone to account, it's that you're not holding each other to account. And so this purposeful mentoring where you're getting a number of people really clear, and you're really clear on we've got to hold each other to account to these, and that includes people holding you to account as the
yeah,
leader when maybe
absolutely.
sometimes you just in that moment of tiredness or whatever you drop,
Yeah.
holding you to account as well. That if we've got that, then that accountability means the standards will be maintained because you've created that as part of your culture. We've got to hold each other to account as part of that process. So one of the phrases that I think comes into play here is when the cat's away, the mice will play. And obviously sometimes that's used about somebody getting up to really naughty mischief. But in this context, looking at when you as the leader aren't in the building, you're not there. If you've not set that culture quite right about this minimum, they'll go, oh, well, he's not here. He can't see us, so we'll let the standard drop. So how do we stop standards dropping when we're not present?
I mean, it's partly what we've just talked about of having other cheerleaders who will be
guardians, custodians,
you know, sustaining that. And it's around having those minimum standards ingrained and embedded and understood. So constant reinforcement of them. And then I think it's reminding people, but in a positive way. So, you know, you might say something to the team like, I'm going to be away at a conference for 2 days next week. And you know what's really great for me is I know I can go away and do that. And you're all going to carry on here, you know, doing it the way
X, Y, and Z
we do it,
specifics,
you know, doing your very best. You know, it's just that reinforcing of it, that actually that's my expectation. And I trust that you're going to do that.
So it's about setting that expectation when you are going to be away, almost reminding them of the core standards you do expect to see as well. As we've just said, you've already tried to create that culture where there's cheerleaders, guardians, custodians of that standard as well. And you've tried to create that culture anyway of holding each other to account. So actually it doesn't matter whether you're there or not. And I guess a key bit, which we've mentioned already, is that the purpose is really clear. The reason why we hold these standards is because this is the culture we want. This is the environment we want, the safety that this culture that we've set brings. Okay, so I've got a few characters to explore who often will try and push the boundaries of the minimum. And you know me, I like a bit of alliteration. So the first one to explore is the moaning myrtle. The one who is moaning about this. Why do we have to do this? Why can't we just do this? Oh, this is a pain to me, you know, maybe on a policy or an approach, who is constantly moaning about the minimum. How do we deal with those to turn them around to no longer be a moaning myrtle?
I think this comes back to holding up a mirror to them, because some people don't realise that what they're doing is moaning all the time. So I think it comes back to talk to them, not about them. So you don't, you know, close your office door and go, that myrtle's moaning her head off again. You know, because she probably doesn't necessarily see that. So it's, do they realise the impact their moaning is having on the rest of the team, on their colleagues? If they are moaning that this policy is a load of nonsense and why do we need to do it like that? Oh, so do you have a better way of, you know, do you have a suggestion you could make that we could consider? Because often they don't. They just want to moan about everything. Equally, they may have some valid points to make, which you need to hear and take on board. So it's around giving them the opportunity, but, you know, be clear that the moaning is having a negative impact. But, you know, if you've got something constructive to say or something you feel we should change, then there are, you know, channels you go through. There are ways you can raise that. Are you aware of those? And equally, you might find it irritating that we do it like that, but are you aware we do it like that because X, Y, and Z, and this is our purpose, and this is why we do it like that?
So it's bringing her back to the purpose, her back to the impacts, as well as holding a mirror to herself about how the moaning is, you know, upsetting everyone.
Winding everybody up.
It's also about bringing, in one sense, a mirror for her to see around the full perspective around why you're doing it.
Why we do it like that.
Great. So our next one is the persistent pushing Pete, who, you know, is constantly pushing the boundaries. He's not necessarily moaning about it, but he's just pushing, trying to step below that minimum. So how do we deal with the persistent pushing Pete?
Again, talk to them, challenge, remind them this is our minimum expectation. And at the moment, your behaviour, your approach, your attitude is not meeting that. the reason this is our minimum expectation is because this is what we're working for. This, it gives our customers a better experience. It improves things for the children. Those real high value things that it's very hard to argue against. That's our purpose. That's why we do it. You are not meeting it. And I think you do that for an amount of time to try and change it. And if they're still pushing and not following policy procedure, it's a different conversation.
Yeah, then you have to be a bit tougher.
So
I wonder whether part of that is worth also just really trying to put it in terms of an incentive that works for him as to why to say this side of the boundary line around the minimum. Because quite often if people are not making that change, the incentive isn't strong enough. So it's just understanding where he's coming from, and all the things you've said, totally right. They need to understand the purpose, don't they? They need to understand the impact, but just getting him to realise why it's important for him to do it. And I'm wondering as well, actually, for someone like the persistent pushing Pete, having one of your good people that are on board just to mentor, work alongside him, almost it makes it harder for him to push those boundaries. Can be putting someone that is going to maintain those and just holds them back from crossing
But it's
the line.
absolutely not about shifting at all. Doesn't matter how much
he tries to push. Firm boundaries, soft edges.
Doesn't move.
Then my next one is free-spirited Frida. Almost if we think about this in terms of schooling, it's often the parent that parks on the zigzags just because they want to. The person who turns up for meetings late just because I was busy. I was doing the thing that I really loved doing, and I just got caught up in it.
Because it's all about me.
So what about free-spirited Fridas? How do we manage those? They're lovely creatures. They're well-meaning.
It's bringing them back to, there's a reason we all do this, there's a reason we're all on time, there's a reason we don't park on the zigzags, because that potentially causes an accident, and it might be convenient for you, but the risk to other people is too great. And I think these are the type of person that it's really important not to just get caught up in, well, it's just their personality. I've worked in places where somebody has been very much doing their own thing. Well, they're very creative. They're a very creative person, and actually that's just how they work. Doesn't matter how creative you are, you can stick to policy, procedure and whatever. So again, I would say it's about talking to them, not about them, addressing it with them. It all comes back to reminding me of the purpose. And explain why consistency from everybody is important. You don't, if they are a very free-spirited, creative person, you don't want to crush them, but they have to understand that they need to work within the boundaries that everybody else is. But it might be you can find something shiny and new and exciting for them to trial or something, give them a little project to use their free-spirited creativity on whilst they stay within the boundaries of the other
directing
things.
their energy towards
something that not just for the sake of it, but if you've got something that you're looking at, should we change this, shall we introduce this, give it to them.
And they're decent human beings, aren't they? So it's not that they're doing. So it's understanding that motive, trying to get the incentive right for them. Like we just said, firm boundaries but soft edges. Again, so that they just realise where it stands. And it's an affiliative approach. I think works with the free-spirited Fridas, isn't it?
Getting alongside, recognising,
helping them, as you say, understand
that they need to understand the reasons why. We're not doing it to stifle your creativity. It's if we don't all do this, we don't achieve this, and this is the impact on your colleagues, on our outcomes, etc.
So one of the ones that I think I come across with, for myself and for others, are the struggling Sams. So it's not a sense of will for them, it's a sense of skill. They're nice enough, they're good people, but they're just struggling to manage something. I guess, there's even an element here of struggling Sam if someone is got a lot of issues on at home, and therefore they're very emotionally charged, and therefore they might be losing it a bit at work. And so there's that sense, particularly for us as leaders and others, we may have some empathy with their situation, and therefore having this conversation with them. But we still need to maintain those
maintain it,
minimums. So how do we deal with the struggling Sams?
It still comes back to talk to them, not about them. Have those conversations with them. Be transparent. You can be empathetic. I've noticed, you seem to be finding it hard to, whatever. Is there something I can help you with? And then if it's around, issues at home or outside of the workplace, there may be some strategies you can suggest, but reinforcing, obviously, when you're at work, we do need you to be able to, and we will help you with this. But that expectation that those standards haven't moved just because you're having a hard time. Be clear on policy and process, because if it's skill, not will, there is you put support in, you put a structured plan in place, some more of that mentoring you've talked about, of somebody that does have the skill and can model that and support them. And hopefully they improve. And again, if they don't, that's a different conversation.
Yeah. So what we're unpicking here is what actually the soft edges are.
Yeah.
So the soft edges are recognising the challenge they're facing, listening and talking to them. So it's that listening, particularly as part of the soft edges. Finding out what support they need in order to improve their skills, in order for them to meet it. Equally, we've used the word skills, but if, for example, if someone is struggling with their emotions, there is a sense here where it's still the skills, where you provide some support to help them recognise and manage their emotional situations they're dealing with more skills and strategies. That means they can maintain it, and recognising themselves when their buttons are being pressed earlier rather than later on. So this is what some of the soft edges is about. We still maintain the boundary. This is where you don't cross but I recognise you're having this difficulty, so this is the support I can bring. There's a phrase I use sometimes with people, which I think will work with our free-spirited Fridas as much as our struggling Sams, which is, what is it that I can do in order to help you? Because sometimes they need to recognise they need to take ownership of it, but they might need some support in order to do that.
You're not there to solve it for them. You can't, but you can help them help themselves. And also, I think that's giving a clear message that your expectation is that this is going to be sorted. This is not going to just carry on.
Yeah. So we've just explored a little bit there about what the soft edges are. We need to keep the boundaries, so firm boundaries with the soft edges. So there are moments, though, where we change the minimum. There is a new minimum that's needed because something has changed, or actually you've recognised that actually the minimum you had wasn't right, and you need to improve things. So how do we go about establishing a new minimum when everyone has been used to the minimum that we set before? It wasn't that it's dropped, although sometimes it can be that things have dropped and we need to re-establish the new minimum. What is it that we need to do to establish that?
I think it's around thinking really carefully about how you're going to introduce the change back up, or if you realise you need to introduce something. And when I was thinking about this, I was reflecting on, I worked somewhere once where I went in to a school that was in a bit of a pickle. And one of the things that, there's a huge amount to address, but one of the things that really stood out to me, because it was very visual, was the work attire that people were wearing, or actually the not work attire that people were wearing. And, professional staff who were turning up to work looking like they'd just walked in off the beach, and wearing clothes that did not leave much to the imagination as to what colour their underwear was and things like that. And there is an element of how you present yourself and what you are wearing that reinforces, what your role is, and gives you that kind of authority within that role. And it probably won't surprise you if I say the behaviour of the children at the school was shocking, and there is a correlation between those two things. So I realised that was going to have to be challenged amongst everything else, but there was no point in me going in on one day and saying new dress code from tomorrow, because that would have caused all sorts of challenge and issues. So I planned well ahead, spoke to people individually where I felt it really was too close to the mark and just had a quiet word, but then did a general staff meeting around how are we all presenting ourselves. Like, I wasn't saying people had to be in three-piece suits and whatever, it was just wearing appropriate dress for the workplace when you are working with children, and bearing in mind if you work with young children you will be bending down on the floor and leaning over them and things like that, and then talked to staff around some of the things they felt were or were not appropriate, worked with the senior leadership team to draw up a basic expectation code, issued that to everybody before the summer holiday and said, this is coming in from the start of the next term on the 1st of September. So people had time to adjust and get used to it. Then had one of my cheerleaders who was, a member of the staff team, and very well connected and liked by them, as well as a senior leader, who, bless her, organised a work dress code shopping day trip to Norwich for people that wanted to go. So they went and had a day out and bought some more for some of the more appropriate clothing, but it was made into a fun thing. And then from the start of the next term, all senior leaders modelling the dress code, and I made a real effort going around saying to people, oh, that's a lovely blouse, where's that from? I like your tie, that really goes nicely with your things like that. So just genuine reinforcement and acknowledging that people had made an effort, and most importantly, as soon as something looked like it was creeping back in, somebody turned up wearing something, quiet word, actually, that's not within the dress code. Please, stick a cardigan on, don't wear it again.
Yeah. What's interesting about the very last bit you talked about there, you're naming it, but you're not shaming it.
Yeah.
So it's that quiet word rather than the public
Yeah.
stuff again, which is about keeping people on board. So what I'm hearing there is actually a number of strands we've already talked about. So there's the sense of listening, the sense of identifying people who are with you and using them, sense of collaboration. I like the way you described that sense of fun shopping trip.
Yeah.
So, but even in that, it was setting an expectation about what's going to happen. You talked about that time to adjust to the change of the minimum as well, in terms of giving people notice, but it all stemmed from working together on it. And I guess what has underpinned a number of those bits really that we've already talked around is being really clear on the impact. So the impact of what we're currently wearing is this. The impact that we could have if we wore this could be this. So that's picking up on some of the kind of 4 key steps if you're trying to kind of move someone on in a conversation is provide contrast.
Yeah.
This is what we're currently doing, but this is the impact, this is what we could do and what it could look like. And that speeds up engagement when you present both things alongside each other. And then people have more of an idea of, okay, maybe I can see what they're talking about here. So I think any bringing in of change or a new minimum that we're going to set, I'm really reminded of Noster's model, which we've talked about before on the podcast. 5 key things that if you're managing change, the first one is really clear vision that everybody understands, helping people with the skills. So some people either don't have the skills or don't think they have the skills to manage this new expectation. So it's being really purposeful in developing those skills for people, providing the resources that they need to manage that, having the right incentive for individuals that really work for them. So it's not just a blanket incentive, and then a really clear action plan. So the one you were talking about there was a plan to it. There was a staged process.
Staged process, not just going, we're changing this overnight.
Yeah. Clear vision, this is why we're doing it. It's about setting the if we set the standards, it then models that for behaviour as well. Resources, now you didn't provide everyone with their work gear, but you facilitated that and ensured that was happy, and you also focused and praised when you started to see people bringing those in. So that that reiterated around expectation, but also those are the resources, those are the clothes that you should have as part of that process. So even in that one, you're utilising those clear kind of steps towards that minimum. So, Anna, time flies when we're having fun.
Having fun, absolutely.
And so we're at that point in our podcast where we just talk about top 3 tips. So for you, what are your top 3 tips that you have?
talk to people, not about them. Because you can talk about them in your office and moan about what they're doing till the cows come home. Until you talk to that person, nothing will change.
Yeah.
Be mindful of slippage, even
Yeah.
teeny tiny things, because 1 minute will become 2, will
Yeah.
become 3. So it's that nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
You know, challenge it from the outset, and tell people when they're getting it right, and notice it and celebrate it.
Yeah.
Because that positive reinforcement leads it to spread, and you get those positive ripples going
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Good.
So that's mine, Colin. What about yours?
Well, I think from our conversation today, I think one thing that I'm just an advocate of in everything is getting really clear on your purpose. So
Yeah.
if you know your reason why that sits behind all that you do, but particularly on a specific
Yeah.
aspect, that will drive you to maintain that minimum. It will give you the energy to have those conversations. So I think that's the first one. I loved your little phrase about, was it sweat the
Sweat the small stuff.
sweat the small stuff. Yeah,
It
is
matters.
key, isn't it? And if you're
Yeah.
maintaining those tiny little things, it just sets the marker for everything else. And I think my third one, which I think again is really important, it's come through a number of strands, is just around. It's that whole thing around not doing it just by yourself.
Yeah.
Being really purposeful and gathering a team of people, mentoring others in that expectation. And that means when the cat is away, the mice won't play, because it's not just you. It also means in those day-to-day moments, everybody is in there, and it'll create that sense of accountability towards those standards.
It's that shared understanding leading to shared accountability, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Anna, thank you for joining me as we've explored mastering the minimum. For those who've been listening and watching, we are so pleased that you could join us in the Leadership Lounge today. We hope it's been of help to you as you continue to try and master your minimums, and we look forward to you joining us in our next podcast in the Leadership Lounge.